once upon a time in China, the government decided it was going to become an economic superpower. And it embarked on a massive program of fixed asset investments to transform the country. And the Communist Party began to think like the board of directors of a multinational corporation. So high growth rates at over 8% became the litmus of leadership, and a semblance of enormous prosperity evolved, with Mao Zedong's face actually supporting the US dollar. And during the previous administration of Hu Jintao and Wen Jiabao, the view was, in order to keep social stability, high employment would require over 8% growth, hypergrowth, 9% growth, but nobody was calculating the cost of growth to the environment. And of course, most important is the precious Himalayan glacial system, which actually supports the water systems of both China, South Asia, Southeast Asia. More than 1/2 of humanity depends on the Himalayan water sources. Now China has a water crisis. And you have about 70% of the surface water is too toxic for human contact. 60% of underground water is undrinkable. Put it on agriculture, you've got healthcare problems. That is the cost of growth. So now we have to rethink what growth is going to be in China and globally, because in fact, growth is not just industrial output. It's a complexity, an entanglement to have healthy growth. And so the cost of this growth is ultimately borne by the government. So maybe you don't have 8% growth in the end. Maybe you have much less. Maybe you even have negative growth. When you add up the cost of repairing this, it comes back to corporations, private sector. We're talking about food security, water security, and ultimately, of course, health security, which impacts every single one of us all around the world. We're all in the same boat together. China's position began to change, ironically, at COP17. And there was a board. We convened 2 organizations, Himalayan Consensus and African Consensus, brought together, just like today, chief negotiators from China, India, and Brazil. And everybody came to one conclusion. Carbon trading, which is the main subject of the UNFCCC negotiations, is not solving anything. In fact, it's prolonging the problem, pushing it into the future. The ultimate solution has got to be targets of zero carbon. That's going to have to be the solution to avoid planetary disaster. You know, part of the problem is, though, most of the negotiations of the UNFCCC are blocked by the United States, Canada, and Saudi Arabia because of the oil industry, which ultimately controls our governments or their decision-making. So the question is, the underdeveloped countries are looking to the larger developed countries for a solution because they're hijacked by the oil industry. Basically, the solution has got to be finding zero carbon through each country's own initiative. That was our conclusion at COP17, and how to create a new kind of growth based on reducing carbon. You know, in the frustration of these negotiations, many of us went out to the street to protest. And while the protesters have a lot to say, part of the problem is nobody in the room can hear it because of the Darth Vader people keeping the protesters away from the negotiations, and the fact that most of the leaders are busy grandstanding. But one African student said to me, go up to KwaZulu University, because the African students there have mapped out themselves a program of how to create 1 million jobs to solve the problem of 1 million unemployed in South Africa through the conversion of fossil fuels and coal to renewables, to drop the carbon footprint and to actually create jobs. In other words, create growth through the reduction of coal and carbon in the South African economy. Actually, those African students are showing us the solution. We're not teaching them. We need to learn from them. And to me, that was the most inspiring thing that came out of COP17, of all the discussions. So taking that idea, that blueprint of those South African students, I went back to my old mentor, Zhurongji, who I worked with on the state-owned enterprise reforms in the 90s, and he was an ardent environmentalist. His daughter, Zhu Yanlai, who's a leader in the financial sector, vice president of Bank of China, Hong Kong, worked with me and her teams of people and networks to try and think how China can shift from fossil fuels to renewables as part of a growth pattern. In other words, business to create solutions that are profitable, that create jobs, that are good for business in the process of conversion. We drafted a document. We gave it to Li Wei, who is the advisor to the Prime Minister right now, Premier Li Keqiang. He pushed it to the Environmental Ministry, and guess who stepped in to fund the work? It was the EU under the EU Dialogue Program. Now, why is Europe so interested in this? Because Europe has the technology to create buildings, cities that can produce energy through renewable sources, but they can't scale it. You're talking about countries of 4, 5, 6, 7 million people. That's not even a district in any city in China or India for that matter. And the Environmental Ministry gave us an assignment, define ecological civilization as the umbrella for this. Basically, give China its own version of sustainable development that was coined in 1992, a European idea at the Earth Summit, reinforced at Rio Plus 20, but Rio Plus 20 disappointed all of us because there was no map or no green print, no solutions to lead the way forward. So that's what we decided to do, was to sit back and come up with a 5-pillar set of solutions based on China's own circumstances and situation. I'm going to walk you through that pillar. The first is infrastructure investments. The China economic miracle came about through fixed asset investments in infrastructure to get the nation out of poverty. Now, I'm not saying to change that model, keep that model, but change the nature of fixed asset investments. Regrid those investments that have already been made. They're mostly based on, as Li Bin said before, 66% fossil fuels, coal, 66% coal. Coal is the enemy. How to reduce coal? But you have provinces in China like Ningxia, Shanxi, and Inner Mongolia that depend on coal. So you're going to have government come in, subsidize, create new industries for those provinces. It will require government fixed asset investment to do this and to continue a new kind of growth that will create jobs in the process of regridding China with new solutions and buildings that can be using solar panels instead of just glass windows. Think of all the light we have in cities like Beijing and Shanghai, despite the pollution, huge light. The concept we came up with was cities that are smart, green and blue. Smart meaning you have efficient transport, green, low carbon infrastructure, and blue, of course, water recycling systems, because China, like the rest of the world, will soon be facing a water crisis. And of course, our transportation right now is not efficient in China. You can have Lamborghinis and Ferraris more than anywhere else in the world, but you can't move in the cities because the traffic is really an interactive parking lot. You can't get to more than one meeting a day. But these are the solutions, the opportunity for solutions. And of course, water recycling. There should not be a flush toilet in China that's using fresh water, nor in California, and we should be using vacuum water. Credit and fiscal policy. This was key to the reforms in the 1990s. And of course, bringing these policies into the climate change equation. All the gizmos, gadgets, LED lights. Why would a building like this decide to transform over unless it's getting a tax break or a rebate? And of course, these policies can reform the very structure of industry to be more efficient. And of course, all the gizmos and gadgets that we're using can be solar powered or powered through renewable efficient energy. I wear a watch, which is a solar watch, because I do mountain climbing, you know? But this watch, every single iPad, iPhone should be solar. Occupy Wall Street should occupy Mac stores until they create solar panels on every single gizmo. This is an opportunity for business. It's not about protesting. It's about an opportunity. And it'll be the fiscal and credit policy systems that are being adapted in China now that are going to drive this, and rethinking the growth matrix, rethinking GDP. We talked about Bhutan. I work as an advisor to the Bhutanese government. Brought this idea of gross national happiness to China. And yeah, it sounds a bit too Shangri-La, right? But they've been talking about GDP plus environment, plus healthcare, and plus social well-being. This is the new litmus test. Liebman was just saying, officials are now going to be promoted not only on hard GDP, but also what they do for the environment, what they do for healthcare. This has already begun as a pilot scheme in Zhejiang province, where officials have got to deliver on the environment. They've got to deliver on healthcare. That'll be the new way of promoting officials. That's revolutionary in China, but it takes into account a greater whole of what growth is. Growth needs to be a healthy economy. It needs to include heritage, and it also needs to include the social well-being of each person. And governance. One of the problems is standards across the board. You know, there's different departments in government like everywhere else in the world, and they have different points of views and interests. Establishing standards across the board, I do believe, will be the pillar of this administration, and red lines have already been fixed. Areas of grassland, mountains, and marine areas that cannot be touched. There was a plethora of mining licenses given out in the last administration that has stopped. And the new red lines are being drawn. Just leave it alone. And education. China has an opportunity to change the subject that we've talked about each day, and that's individual human values. Deng Xiaoping once said, to get rich is glorious. I don't think it's glorious. I think protecting the environment, the community, and the future of our children is glorious. That's going to be the next mindset in China, and they have the power through the educational system, top down, to change this. It's already begun. You can call it propaganda, news, media, it's already pushing the values of conservation and community rather than the values of individual consumption. And reinvesting and investing in education of kids. You know, I say as an American, we shouldn't allow any single kid to graduate from school with debt. And China's going to be investing into the PhDs, the MAs, to create innovation, because innovation is not just social media, which is antique spyware being released on the market to basically collect data from us. Innovation will be about combating the challenges of climate change. Innovation will be about things that Sam was just talking about, creating new systems of efficiency, because we're all sharing this little rocket ship in space, and if we crash this thing, you know, we're all losing. In the end, that's social justice. And this came about with a document which basically compressed 3 or 4 drafts that we did into a decision that was adopted on April 25th of this year. I'll say our first draft was submitted, ironically, April 26, 2013. Imagine in 2 years, a national policy that changes the direction of China's industrial structure, value system, growth matrix has been put in place, a decision done under the government of Xi Jinping, who just spoke at the UN and announced a $12 billion South-South cooperation fund to be raised to $20 billion in a few years. China is once again going to change the entire direction of the planet, presenting a new trajectory of growth. And you want to know something? The European Union is in there with the technology. The European countries have it. They've been working with China, and they're leading, because some of our previous leaders didn't believe that climate change was a scientific phenomenon. And some of our future leaders may think that consumption is what should drive our economy rather than conservation. But I think it's going to be, in many ways, China that may be leading us toward COP21. Because remember, civilizations do not rise and fall on stock prices, derivatives, or forward indexes. They rise and fall on whether people have water to drink, which will soon be more expensive than oil. And I'll leave you with one thought. We can give our kids money, we can give them an education, but ask yourself, can we give our children water to drink in the future? Thank you.